Hi, and welcome to this week's Three Legs, Four Wheels F1 podcast. It's Paul here with
Craig.
Dan.
I'm just going to be Dave. I want to be Dave.
You're breaking me. We have got Craig Scarborough coming up later on, though.
Dan.
And Dan's here now. We haven't been drinking, I promise.
Only tea.
Well, I've got a coffee. Hang on, what's in this?
What?
Probably coffee.
I would hope so.
Yes.
Unlike
Hello.
my coffee the other morning, which was almost gravy.
Really?
Yeah,
Who do you
it
know?
Oh yeah, I saw that photo. That was the only fools and horses moment.
Oh, yeah.
Actually, with
The gravy was in the mugs. It was literally water away.
with your current length of beard, you have got a bit of an Uncle Albert vibe going on.
Yeah, it's not grey enough yet, though. It's a bit grey around here, but...
Yeah, give it a while.
Yeah.
Give it a while. Anyway, should we talk about Formula One instead?
Yes, let's do that.
Yeah.
Go on then.
What news is there?
Not much.
Obviously the,
Okay.
The main speculation at the moment is the Charles Leclerc to Ferrari is a done deal.
Which was
But
being...
it's not because it's not
It's
been
not
done.
because it's not been officially done and announced.
It's not a done deal until it's a done deal.
And it's not a done deal, so it's not officially done.
Yeah.
Well, that's what we thought last night anyway, but it turned out we were 100% wrong. As of this morning, on Tuesday, why is it always Tuesday? Ferrari announced that Kimi would be leaving the team at the end of the 2018 season, followed very quickly, about 5 minutes later, by Kimi announcing on Instagram that he'd be joining Sauber for 2 years. This obviously means that one of the Sauber drivers will be moving, and to no one's surprise at all, Charles Leclerc is going to be a Ferrari driver in 2019 and onwards. It's been rumoured for quite a while that Leclerc would be moving, and the rumours have sort of started to appear in the last week or so that Kimi would be going back to Sauber, where he started his F1 career in 2001. And as it turns out, for once, paddock rumours were actually pretty much 100% spot on. No word on whether Kimi is going to take a management role with the team at the end of the 2 years, but 2021 is a long way off, and as we'll talk about later, 2021 may be happening in 2023. Right, back to being as right as we knew we could be at the time for the end of jump cut number 1.
Right, next.
Yeah.
More to the point, what is in the tea? Oh, God, you're driving me home tonight.
But anyway, no, quick run over of that then. It's Gazzetta Italia, isn't it, who have translated a Finnish website that is reporting what Mika Salo said on Finnish TV, which is a very roundabout way of saying that there's no direct translation from Finnish to any other language. So the Italians have taken it as what Mika Salo said was Raikkonen was going to Sauber to be given some of the team as well. A portion of the team.
That's in 2020, but it'll drive for him in 2019. It'll be
Yeah.
a straight swap with Leclerc for next season.
And then obviously that means Charles Leclerc will end up in the Ferrari. But that remains to be seen, and something that I'm sure we'll talk about with Craig Scarborough later on.
Yes. And then if it all comes out as true tomorrow morning, I expect a double jump cut in this show. Should we just move on to talk about Singapore, because it is the Singapore Grand Prix this weekend?
We can do.
Hashtag F1 night race.
It's the
as they seem
original
to
one.
want to use. That is true.
It is the original night race. I mean, we have Bahrain night races. Where else? Abu Dhabi evening race. I suppose.
Twilight race.
Longest
Without
race of the year?
vampires.
Is it the longest race of the year? Or is Baku the longest race of the year now?
I don't know. I seem to remember Singapore goes on for quite a while.
Monza,
doesn't
yeah, 'cause it always-
Monza is the shortest race of the year,
Yeah.
time-wise.
It almost hits that 2 hour mark, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's usually pretty close to the 2 hours when it's normally dry.
Yeah.
And I think, did they run out of time last year, or did they just scrape under
I
it?
think
'Cause
they just scraped under it, you know. I've
With
got
the rain.
with the rain and the safety car.
Yeah, I
after
think
the
it was-
massive first corner. Well, wasn't even first corner pile up.
I don't know whether it's fake memories or not, but I think I almost remember them running out of time on like the last lap.
Yeah, I think that's what
Yeah.
happened. I think just after Hamilton crossed the line
Yeah.
to start his last lap, the timer ran down.
So yeah, I think we can say longest race of the year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
Get
will,
a vein up.
I will always remember the Singapore Grand Prix for a major car crash that happened.
Alonso Gate.
The year of the first one. No, it happened outside my flat.
Oh, right, okay.
I used to live at the bottom of the hill, which was a one-way road. And somebody drove down it the wrong way, drunk,
Oops.
This is in the middle of the race, which is why I actually missed the crash in the race. Because they
dear.
drove down it the wrong way, bumped off about 7 or 8 cars, and then did a handbrake turn.
You picked the wrong crash to watch.
I was also on the phone to the police while the crash on the TV was going on.
What the fuck was Sting going to do about it?
I sent him
I'm
a
going
message.
to tell Stuart Copeland. He's just going to rhythm his way around the room, make everyone feel better.
Well, I said I was on the phone to the police. I sent him a message in a bottle.
Oh.
You asked for that. But no, going back to Singapore, it is, of course, home of the original Crashgate,
Original Crashgate.
which Alonso wasn't involved in.
Was it the first wet race we had last year? Was that the first time it had rained during a race session?
I think it was.
Despite the fact that it happens during Singapore's rainy season. Be interesting if it happens again, because it really spiced things up last year, didn't it? Especially off the start line. Traditionally, Red Bulls or Ferraris tend to do well. Danny Rick, I think, has got 4 podiums in the 5 races he's done there.
Yeah,
So,
the only issue
But
is
no wins.
No wins.
The only issue is going to be: is he going to end up taking penalties again?
I'm going to say yes.
What about Verstappen as well? You know,
I'm going to say yes.
Red Bull just, they're not quite.
At
No, not at the races. If
Yeah.
they'd won in Hungary, you know, you could maybe say that they're definitely up there with when the power circuits are all gone and you're onto the strong chassis circuits,
Yeah.
and you'd say that Red Bull are in with a shout. But at the moment, Red Bull aren't in with a shout. Traditionally,
If they can make it to the finish, they are.
sometimes depending on what happens. Yeah, they do. Have
Again, it just depends on the reliability and
Yeah.
where the cars are starting. Because you know, if they're running this C-spec engine, which Carlos Sainz says is great,
Yeah.
and that's 1/6 of all the Renault-powered drivers that like it.
yeah.
Well, no, Carlos Sainz said it's a good baseline for the new engine, didn't he? I think that was his thing. It's like, you know, it's a good first step for Renault for the new.
For next year's,
Yeah.
yeah. You've made it. Now make it work.
Yeah.
Which they need to pull. They need to pull something out of that pretty sharpish. Otherwise, I think they'll find themselves genuinely losing 4th place again to Haas.
Yeah.
I think they've lost fourth place to Haas this year. I think Renault are more invested in the long term than the short term gains.
I think if you look at Singapore, it can throw up the occasional, not even the occasional. It often throws up a result that's quite unexpected.
Yeah.
Was it Palmer? Was it last year? Palmer
Yeah.
scored 6th. Sainz was 4th.
I think Haas will be quite strong because they seem to have they've got that car that historically was the Williams car, where it seems to be all right just about everywhere and in every area around the car.
An all rounder.
Yeah, so I think whereas Renault just they seem to be losing lacking a bit of downforce.
7 out of 10 all round.
Yeah, so I think Haas are going to have them at Singapore.
Yeah, it's possible. At the sharp end of things, Mercedes tend to struggle usually, don't they? But the Ferraris didn't do themselves any favours last year.
Tell you what, Haas podium might be on if you've got 2 Red Bulls with getting penalties as well.
That
So
could be a good call.
Yeah, Haas podium might not be out of the question.
Start line shenanigans like last year as well. I mean, it could definitely happen. Even McLaren, like with their, I know they were still running Honda this time last year. Even McLaren and Alonso qualified 5th or something last year, and he was caught up in that first lap tangle, missing a bit of floor for a lot of the race. I seem to remember.
Yeah.
Not that we're expecting great results from McLaren, but it's the thing I'm trying to say is Singapore, with it being a night race, it's a bit of an equaliser.
Yeah.
Especially if the wet stuff comes down.
Yeah, Alonso qualified 8th last year and retired on lap 8
8th.
with a massive hole in the side pod and half the floor missing.
Yes.
Yeah, I think he was caught up in that first lap incident.
Yeah, because
I think, Verstappen went over him or something.
Verstappen hit Raikkonen for the second time and pushed Raikkonen into Alonso.
Who was trying to go around the outside
Yeah.
to avoid it all.
Yeah, he was just in the wrong place at the wrong time and caught up like a complete passenger. Once again, he wasn't directly involved.
Alonso not directly involved in shenanigans at Singapore, although this time he didn't benefit. I usually enjoy the Singapore Grand Prix. I mean, it's usually something spectacular going on. Everybody remember Schumacher, Kobayashi, Schumacher, Bruno Senna,
Yeah.
Schumacher, anyone else?
At that time.
Well, it was at that time. It was 2 years in a row, wasn't it, that Schumacher in a Mercedes decided he was going to have a
Mount
big accident
somebody.
at Singapore. Well, Singapore would have been one of the circuits he wouldn't have been used to racing at in his first stint in Formula One because it wasn't around then.
And it's probably one of the first ones of the new tracks too that Herman Tilke didn't go and like talk to him about designing.
Yeah,
How do you want this one to look?
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah. It's I've been finding out as well from doing the Formula League, which we'll talk about in a bit. It's really difficult to find a good setup.
I'm saying nothing because I'm incredibly happy with the setup that I've got and the time. And at one stage,
I hate your setup.
reasons behind this. And at one stage, I was 78th on all the PS4 players
Oh, nice.
out of over 1,000. And you know where I'm going next. I would like to thank Bradley Chambers for sending that to me, which I've since made a couple of tweaks on and improved my time.
Very good.
So, in true Carlos Sainz style, it's a good baseline to work from.
Yeah, no,
Bradley, text it my way.
I'll send it you later. I
Yeah.
can copy it from his tweet. What we will have to do, talking of Formula League, is get some kind of setup sharing thing going on social
It's a
media.
good idea, that.
yeah,
Very
set
good
up thread
idea.
or something for every Formula League challenge.
Yeah. Talking of Formula League, I'm just going to do this now. Somebody, let me just find the tweet, said that the Brawn is only available in the Headline Edition DLC pack. What do you do if you don't have that? So, I've done some research, and the performance of the 2010 Red Bull is rated the same as the Brawn. So, if you don't have the Headline Edition download content, and don't have the 2009 Brawn, use the 2010 Red Bull.
Grand stuff.
So, both of those are perfectly allowed, and you've still got another week to get it in. Close off it is Monday the 17th.
I can see controversy.
I might do a lap in both, see what happens.
Yeah.
Worth a try. Worth a try. Should we do some predictions?
Yeah.
I've got Sean's here that she gave before we started recording tonight, and she's going for a Vettel win, Verstappen second, Raikkonen third.
Vettel, Verstappen, Raikkonen, no Mercedes on the podium.
No Mercedes on the top three.
Yeah, because it is a circuit they traditionally struggle at. Is she gone for a hero and a villain?
No, she hasn't. She's just gone for the top three. I mean, you said a circuit that Mercedes traditionally struggle at. They did get first and third last year, but there were no Ferraris by lap 2.
Yeah, no Ferraris and one Red Bull.
Yeah.
And didn't the Red Bull finish between them?
Yes.
Yeah. So I think it's difficult when we don't know where Red Bull are going to be starting with the penalties. So it's really hard to sort of make that prediction. I think that Red Bull could do something if they're not taking penalties.
I think Red Bull will still be behind Mercedes because they don't feel the same team this year. Well, every other year, they're like the top two teams have been down, and Red Bull have been pretty close to them. It's always been that if one of those makes mistakes, we're in there. But like they've still been sort of 30 and 40 seconds behind, haven't they, by the end of the race?
Yeah.
So they're not as close as they were.
I mean,
They've gone
the
backwards.
lonely Max Verstappen has become a thing.
Yeah.
What was he? Something like 10 seconds behind and 15 seconds ahead.
You look at Belgium, he had like a 25-second gap either side or something like that.
I said
wasn't
last
it?
week he was swimming after Wilson.
That is an excuse for hitting Bottas.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm going to say Vettel to win. Hamilton second. Raikkonen third.
Okay. I am going to go for something similar. Vettel to win, but Hamilton second. But I'm going to go for Bottas third.
I need some points in this as well, so I could do with a good 9-pointer.
Yeah, I think Mercedes will come good this time. Who's going next?
I'm going to go for a curveball because I think Seb is going to be pushing very hard.
I think so.
Too hard?
Bottas win.
Oh.
Raikkonen second. Grosjean third.
Grosjean.
Whoa.
This is either big points for Dan or probably no points for Dan.
I think Dan's right. I think Vettel's going to be pushing hard.
Too hard.
Yeah, I think Kimi, given all the talk about contracts and whether we find out that he's losing the seat, is going to be off the pace, and you're going to get a Mercedes 1-2 with Grosjean third.
Which Mercedes first?
Hamilton.
Hamilton, Bottas.
Even if
Grosjean.
Bottas's brakes are a bit hot and he needs to
Even
slow
if
down to cool them down.
Even if Bottas is leading by 15 seconds on the last lap, still a Hamilton victory.
Box now, box now.
Brakes can fail, can't they? At Singapore as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, so if Bottas is in the lead, he
Yeah.
might need to
Valtteri-
slow down a bit.
Valtteri, you were on the limit of your contract.
Well, didn't they have the electronics issue a couple of years ago where they were getting electronic interference from the underground trams?
Yeah, they did.
Yeah.
And it was messing with the radio and it was messing with some other car systems because somebody complained that the steering wheel blanked out during one of the practice sessions.
Well, did you see the footage that Sky did, where I think who was it? Well, one of the Sky guys had a radio-controlled car controller in the subway and was controlling the car that was on the track. That's how close the subway is to the track.
That is mental. That's really close.
Yeah, I'm guessing that they don't run the subway during
No, I think they've had to stop.
during race or practice periods now.
Just had a look at the weather forecast for Singapore. Bearing in mind, again, we are still 5 days away from the first sessions. But scattered thunderstorms for the next 10 days.
So there is a good chance of wet weather and shenanigans.
But as Lee was just saying then, it does rain at the same time every day. It's just that when the race has been happening, it just has forgotten to rain for most of the years that the race has been run.
Well, I hope there's no major weather delays for this one. Unlike what happened in one of the NFL games yesterday, the Miami-Tennessee one, which actually took something like 7 hours and 50 minutes to complete because they kept having to drag all the players off the field and get the fans out the stands because of thunderstorms.
I remember that the 2009 when it was cancelled in Malaysia.
Malaysia,
'cause-
half points.
Yeah. And I'm sure it was Christian Horner turned around and said, "Oh,
Oh, the infamous Kimi Chock ice race.
yeah." And he said to Christian, he said, "Well, what do you think about the race happened to be cancelled?" And he said, "Well, we said we should bring it forward." He said, "It's not that they didn't know." He said all the local experts were saying, it rains at this time. It's not like there's a little bit of information here. It rains every time, every time, every day. At this fucking
Same
hell,
time every day.
Where are the words? Same time every day since fucking recorded history.
Yeah. And Singapore is only something like 170 kilometers away from the Sepang circuit where they used to race up until a couple of years ago. So it was last year, wasn't it? Even last year was the last one, was it?
Yeah. Or was it the year before? I think
Can't
last year was
remember.
the first one without one.
Well, look at the 2003 Brazilian Grand Prix, and that's the reason why it's now in October instead of in April.
Yeah. 2016 Brazilian Grand Prix. Even that was fairly wet.
Yes.
The British moved it closer to the rain.
Yeah. And everyone got stuck, didn't they, Lee? You were there with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was snow forecast for that morning as well, which I'm sure we have
Was
mentioned before.
absolutely Baltic.
Are we going to go for a hero and villain for this week? I'm going on the fact that there's two of you have said Grosjean's going to get a podium. He is going to be your hero,
If he does, yeah.
Yeah, if he gets a podium.
and if he doesn't, he'll be your villain because he's cost you points.
Yeah. Depends how he doesn't get the podium.
My hero is going to be Nico Hulkenberg for almost getting a podium.
He almost got as far as the podium last year.
No, year before last. Yeah, he went backwards, didn't he, over the start line?
Yeah.
Villain's going to be Stoffel Van Dorn. For
Last.
Last.
All the time.
Or crashed. Yeah, he's...
I mean, he has said today he's going to give 100% in his remaining races for McLaren.
What's he been doing?
I was going to say, this begs the question.
Which has just reminded me of a tweet that I saw where Zach Brown said that if he was at Toro Rosso, he would totally sign Stoffel Van Dorn.
Ron? Zach, you've got a race team.
Yeah.
You could sign him if you wanted
Yeah.
to.
Yeah, that's why I was a bit confused.
Yeah.
Just thinking of a potential villain.
Oh, my hero's going to be Lewis, by the way. Pole, fastest lap, race win.
Yeah,
You
all
reckon
three.
Reckon he's going to get the Grand Slam? I think.
Do,
I think
do,
he's-
do you think he'll be faster around the circuit than Vettel is?
I don't know about race, but I think I'll get pole.
I mean, fastest lap. It's a bit of a lottery these days. It's like whose team will let them go for it.
Yeah, I think the. You
Yeah,
see, the
big
thing
fi-
is, although Ferrari's got a quicker car than the Mercedes, I don't think it's much quicker. You know, I think there's very little between them.
Yeah.
But I think the talent gap between Vettel and Hamilton is bigger than the gap between the cars. That's why I think Lewis can do it.
So Lewis's talent makes up for the
Yeah.
the difference in outright pace.
Yeah.
You get a big field spread as well, don't you, Singapore? Because it's such a long circuit.
Sounds almost rude.
Field spread.
Yeah.
I mean, you know what I mean? Like after like 3 or 4 laps, rather than the field being like 20 seconds apart, they're usually like a good 40, 50 seconds
Yeah.
apart already by that point. So anything that goes wrong sort of early on for any of the front runners, you know, it's really difficult for them to build that, build spaces back up unless there's a safety car or anything like that. Because, as I say, the field just spread out so quickly.
Yeah.
And
Coming out of Monza as well, Ferrari were under pressure after what happened to them in Monza, and Ferrari rarely react well under pressure.
They usually fire someone,
So
which they might be announcing this week.
yeah, there might be. It depends what kind of race weekend they have, I suppose.
or if Kimi gets pole on Saturday.
Yeah.
When are we going to announce this? Stop it!
Will you stop being such a good driver? It will make it so much easier to fire you if you're crap.
And then how many races have we got left after Singapore?
is it?
7 after this one.
So
6 after this one.
6 after this one. So Kimi gets pole on this one, and then he just thinks to himself, right, 6 more poles. Keep Ferrari drive.
Goodbye, Seb.
We'll talk about that later.
We will.
I think that's something we should bring up with Scarbs.
So,
If only we hadn't already done it. And we
Oh, you didn't do the You're Breaking Time thing again?
no.
so if that's all of our Singapore previews, is there anything we need to raise really for Singapore? Not really.
Not really, apart from the fact that we'll be doing the live blog as usual.
I won't be there.
I was going to say you won't be there, so me
No.
and Dan will be doing the live blog.
Yep. I'll be Twitterizing people.
I'll probably be sat in a pub somewhere watching it, but I won't be here.
You could be reading the live blog while you're watching it in a
I
pub
could
somewhere.
be reading a live blog whilst I'm watching it in a pub. Yeah, quite
I
right.
had to do that. I had to do that somewhere when I was in somewhere foreign. I was following the live blog, see what was going on in qualifying because I couldn't find the telly.
See, it does a bit useless.
Oh no, it wasn't that actually. I was watching it on telly, but it was in foreign.
So you're watching the live blog.
Yeah,
That's when you went to Netherlands, Germany, Netherlands.
yeah. That's bloody it. Because I was in a restaurant. Yeah. Carry on. Mystery
yeah.
solved.
Well done, Lee. You've remembered where you were.
Yeah, well done. I remembered a holiday. Did
I
sh-
remembered where he was. Come on, guys.
All right, you had where you were remembered for you. Shall we just do a total shot then?
Yeah, we can do. We just go
That
straight into that, and then
sounds
we'll chat to Scarbs after we've done the usual end of pod salutations.
Yes. Who's it from?
It is from, and I just had to pick one. So it's from Richard McDonald, and he informed me that he's only he took himself off Twitter and he's just joined back on Twitter so he can send a total shunt in.
That's some
So-
dedication right
So
there.
that that got him. That
So
got
I
him.
hope this
Thank
is
you,
a good
Richard.
one.
Slap bang to the top of the list. It got him.
I hope this is a good one then.
I have taken part in 151 race weekends.
151.
That's a lot.
Interesting phrasing as well.
So we're looking at round about eight years. At current.
Yeah. I was going to say, did Felipe Massa hit 200? 200 races?
He was close. I would look it up, but I'd get banned again.
Yeah.
Yeah, someone like that, someone who's been around the sport for some time. Might not be a Formula One, of course.
Yeah, that is true. But that's only the first clue.
I'm no use in the wet.
Still sounded like Felipe Massa.
Sounds like Damon Hill.
Bert Mylander.
He's used a lot in the wet.
They always complain he's too slow, though.
How about the grooved tyres?
Ooh. Good call. I can see Flood's confusion.
They came in what, 99, 98, 99? And then were outlawed about 10 years later, weren't they?
Yeah, but there were
2009.
yeah,
I
there
think.
were generally less racism.
Yeah, there were, yeah.
Such a stupid idea. I fucking hated groove tyres.
I hated groove tyres.
Everyone hated grooved tyres.
I've raced for 60. Sorry, is that the way it's done? Because I just want to read it how it's put down. I have raced with 16 Formula One teams.
So there have been about 16 different teams in Formula One over the course of the grooved tyre era.
Yep, let's stick with groove tyres for now.
I want a guess. Would you like to give me that as a guess?
Should we go for that one?
Yes.
Grooved tyres.
I'm a bit holy.
Tyres have got holes in them where you put the wheels.
Yeah.
My qualifying and practice effectiveness significantly reduced in 2013.
Yeah, we're back on slicks by then, so it's not grooved tyres, but
DRS?
Yeah, because it's 2013 when they weren't allowed to use them throughout the whole session.
yeah, they could only use them in the DRS zones.
Yeah. DRS is a good
Yeah.
shout, Dan. Dan recovery system.
I have had crashes with both Grosjean and Ericsson.
DRS.
DRS?
Or quite a lot of other drivers.
Yeah.
Yeah. Also, Grosjean and Ericsson.
Is that the guess you want to go with?
DRS?
DRS, yeah,
Yeah.
I'm good with that.
When I first joined F1, I doubled the number of overtakes in a season.
DRS.
DRS.
I was born in Formula One in 2011.
Yep.
My brakes turned me off.
Are you DRS?
Many have called for me to be banned. I am DRS.
Nice one, Dan.
That was good.
And also, that
That was a
brakes
really
turning it off. There'll be
Yeah.
discussions about that, won't there?
Yeah.
Well, it'd be interesting if there were. We'll have to see in the future.
But
Past,
the
future.
past is the future.
No, it's stop it.
But yeah, that was a good question.
It was good.
Thank you, Richard.
I thought DRS was dead like original. So even this
Yeah.
afternoon, I thought, oh fuck, I'll just throw that one in today because it was good.
No, that was a really good one. So if you want to send a total shunt in, how would you go about that?
Tweet them to me in a direct message at a total shunt.
And you can also get hold of all of us on the show at 3 Legs 4 Wheels or
At Dan Dankleton.
At Flood 21.
at Pablo100. We're on Facebook as well, facebook.com/3 Legs 4 Wheels.
Yeah.
And find us on Instagram. We're there and occasionally do something.
As we're at this end of the show as well, and it's all nice and truncated with everyone listening, I'm also going to plug my other two podcasts. I've got another podcast called Start Continue, which is a video game podcast, and another podcast which is like a talk show thing called Must See Audio. So go and search for those.
But you don't just have another two podcasts. You have another 3. Because we have the extra Patreon show.
We do have a Patreon show.
See what I did there?
I
Yeah, you did
That was
see
a
what you
segue.
did there.
I was really, really confused then. I thought, oh no, Paul, I haven't got enough days.
No, there's an extra show that we do every week that you can subscribe to by going to patreon.com/3 Legs 4 Wheels and pledging and donating anything from $1 a month upwards, and all the money goes straight back into the podcast, keeps us going. Spares, bandwidth, hosting, software, cables, you name it, it costs money.
Absolutely.
And we just want to thank everyone who has donated. Shout out this week to Stephen Terra, who is one of our new Patreons.
I don't want to, he scares me.
With a name like Stephen.
Yeah.
My uncle was called Stephen. He did nasty, nasty things.
Well, I would too if I was called Stephen Stevens.
Billy Idol had a guitarist called Steve Stevens for a few years. He did nasty things with a guitar. He sounded terrible.
Oh, well.
Might have to talk about that in the Patreon show.
Maybe.
which we still have to do. Where was that? Yeah, you can go to patreon.com/3legs4wheels, and as I say, thanks to Stephen Terra, who is one of the new patrons who pledged and didn't get a shout out for pledging, and I do apologise greatly for that.
Before we move on, I just need to say we were talking about the Formula One IndyCar swap-overs last week, and we were mentioning McLaren going to IndyCar and potential for IndyCar teams to come to Formula One. And I mentioned about maybe Roger Penske bringing a team to Formula One. I just want to give thanks to Jana for informing me that Roger Penske has said many times in the past he would never return to Formula One after entering in the 70s and losing a good friend to a terrible accident.
Ah, there you go then. Shall we have a jump cut?
We can have a jump cut, or we could talk about Formula League quickly. We've already kind of discussed
Which
it.
we already have. It's Singapore in the dry in either the Brawn or the 2010 Red Bull.
Okay.
Oh,
You got until what, 7 o'clock?
7 o'clock on Monday, the 17th of September. 7
And
o'clock UK time.
that's with the 2018 game.
That's with the 2018 game now, not the 2017 one.
Is it time to say goodbye?
Well, no, it's time to do a jump cut.
It's time to say hello.
Oh,
And as promised, we have a guest with us this week. Craig Scarborough has joined us again. Welcome along, Craig.
Thanks for inviting me back. It's a pleasure.
Obviously, we're sort of at the mid-season point now. We've had the break. The factories are back working again, but everyone seems to have brought upgrades, some more legal than others.
That's a very nice summary. Yes, it really has been a case like that. Yeah, it's going to be interesting also how much more we get for the balance of the year for some of these teams, because I think a lot of them are going to be thinking lots of reg changes next year. Let's kind of maybe pack up in the next few races and that'll do us. But at the sharp end, there's definitely still lots of development going on out there.
Yeah, it certainly seems like it. Lee, you were saying you wanted to ask about development for next season.
yeah. Do you think, as you were saying then about certain teams wrapping up, does this mean that we might have another situation next year like we had with McLaren and Ferrari? Was it 2008 where they were developing right up to the end of the year? Then 2009 came around. They were off the pace.
I mean, yeah, there's always scope for someone dropping the ball somewhere. But if we talk about the teams at the very front, the top three teams, Ferrari, Red Bull, Mercedes, they've got massive resources. They'll have no problem having a team already and long since been working on the new regulations. So I don't think there's a big chance of them going too far astray. But then you get into that kind of midfield pack, which, as we sort of said, I think last time, is the rest of it is just all midfield now.
It is,
it?
yeah.
And you think, well, yeah, someone there could drop the ball. Equally, someone could find something that could make them jump up the grid. But I think what we find now with these regulation changes and the pace of development of these teams is, even if someone came out with something really clever, everyone will have found a way to have copied it within a few races, as we've seen, with so many little things, and like the F duct to the double diffuser. Somehow, everyone managed to add them to the car, even though they were kind of big structural things that you wouldn't have thought were possible. So, yeah, I think there will be a bit of a shake-up in the order next year, and I think there's a couple of teams there that really do need to make a big leap there. We'll come to obviously Williams and McLaren being the key people there. So yeah, it's going to be fascinating because it really is a really open book that we've not really had since 2009, when as much as the 2014 regs were a big change. It was the 2009 that really kind of threw away a lot of the thinking that teams were doing. And we're kind of going back to that stage again now. So, I'd be wondering how sophisticated people will be, by the time we get to Melbourne at the beginning of next year.
Haas is what I'm going to be interested in, whether they can sort of solidify themselves, as being upper midpoint. Yeah, on some races, aren't they? Yeah. To see if they can do that, to keep it going.
Yeah, that is going to be, and I think there's sort of that the leader of the midfield, and sadly, as I say, we talk lots about the midfield because there's no way anyone's really going to catch the top three with the budgets that these people have got. Haas, as you say, they've got to solidify that midfield position, but then you've got Renault, which are really on a big upward curve. and are only increasing their development rate and their investment in the team. So they're going to be interesting. Force India, hopefully, with a shed load of money coming their way from the new owners. What can they do? Hopefully, with a big budget, which as much as they've had better budget over recent years, it still hasn't been that kind of big financial injection that Force India kind of really need to make that step. And as you've seen already from these past two races, even though they've had their points wiped out, bang, they're straight in there. I mean, I know the
straight
two
back in
races,
it.
Do you think
the last two races have really suited them, but they are a very consistent team in terms of getting points finishes.
Do you think the investment they're going to get is going to be like enough to push them like further up the field? I remember was Bob Fernley once saying that it was like an extra 500 million they'd need. If they were to take it further.
I do not get the impression that they are going to suddenly get that couple of 100 million, another 100 people to make that step up to chase the tails of Red Bull and Ferrari. I just don't think I don't think that money's on the table. I don't think that the money exists anywhere in the world, to be honest, for that sort of thing. But in terms of some solid investment, continued investment money available throughout the year, Force India really need to be looking to get back to where they have been, and be the leader of the best of the rest. And they've proven over recent years that they can do that, despite all the other issues that they've had. So that's going to be interesting. But still, you've got teams like McLaren and Williams, who we know absolutely that they've got the strength to jump back up to the front of the grid. So it's everything's to play for next year, really, isn't it? With the regulation changes and the way these teams are changing themselves around a bit internally.
Well, McLaren are nailed on for a championship next year because Alonso left.
Yes, that's that's almost definite, really, isn't it? But I wonder.
First thing we need to ask you, and I'm hoping you can explain this to us, is the whole situation with the Haas flaw. We know that Renault protested. I'm not entirely sure why Haas were allowed to actually start the race with the flaw, knowing that it was illegal, and with the stewards having known it was illegal at that time because they hadn't changed it in the regulation time that they were given. So, one, how did they get away with it for so long? Two, why did it have to come to a protest from a team that had they'd just overtaken in the Constructors' Championships? And three, what's the radius that they measure from, and what bit of it was actually sticking out too far?
Right. Okay.
We are sitting comfortably.
Well, I'm trying to decide which one to do first. If we do the procedural thing first of all. So what happens is when a team design a part on a car or a system or any aspect of the car's design, they can go to the FIA and say, look, we're thinking of doing this. What do you think? And there was obviously conversations going on. Now, as we know, the regulations, the ways that they're worded, either intentionally or unintentionally, can be very woolly and open to lots of interpretation. So there was conversations going on between the FIA, which would be the Formula One delegate, which is Nick Tombazis, the ex-Ferrari McLaren guy. And they never really kind of bottomed out the question as to what they were thinking of on the front of the floor. And then, obviously, things bubbled up with Renault querying it. And then there was a technical directive that was sent out before the summer break. And that basically said is, our understanding of this area of the car, and the FIA explained a bit further. I've never seen actually the wording of this technical directive. Sadly, they're still only shared with the teams and not made public, which I think is a big problem for everyone to really understand where the hell the sport's going. And this directive basically said, we've got to change the design of the front of the floor because it's in contravention. And potentially other teams may have had to change aspects of their floor as well. But Haas went back to the FIA during this process and says, look, we've got the summer break coming up, and manufacturing is done by people like Dallara. They have constraints. They're busy building loads of Formula 3 cars at the moment, whatever it is they're doing over there in Italy. We won't be able to get it done for Spa. So they said, okay, well, everyone has to have their floor updated by Monza. And for some reason, and I don't think Haas have necessarily explained it, either because they couldn't get it changed in time, because they didn't have the old floors, or perhaps they felt that there was still a legal point of view where they could run this newer floor, which was introduced, it's been racing since Canada. So it's been on the car. Wasn't introduced at Monza. It was back in Canada before the summer break. Obviously, Renault then kind of ducked in and says, okay, we've seen pictures of this, because we know that they'll get loads of spy photographs, all of the engineers lean over the barriers during Parc Ferme and what have you. And therefore, Haas were banged to rights, really, in terms of being disqualified, because they were given the warnings. The FA were quite clear where they were at. Renault quite correctly protested. It was upheld. And in my point of view, from what I can see, from the information is in the public domain, Haas were quite right to be disqualified. And it's not Machiavellian. It's the stuff that goes on all the time in Formula One. But if you run with something the FA said, well, you need to have changed that, then you're going to get in trouble.
Well, why is it down to Renault to spot that and not the FIA?
Okay, so the scrutineering that goes on at a racetrack on the Thursday when they're building the cars up, there's two aspects of that going on. First of all, they have like the local scrutineers that will do all of the basic safety checks and all the paperwork and procedural things. So they're making sure that the cockpit opening is the right size, that the seats have got the insert for the neck brace and bits and pieces like that. Then the cars are brought into the scrutineering bay itself. And this is where the FIA measure a number of key things. And they can test it for anything they want within the regulations, in terms of dimensional accuracy, in terms of deflection and all those the weights and bits and pieces like that. What they don't do is check every car for every regulation in the rule book. So if they had spotted something, they could have raised it with the team. Clearly they didn't. And again, it's all down to the interpretation. Renault saw it, and probably some of the other teams have seen this as well, because they all know what everyone else is doing through photography and their own eyeballs. Not to mention just chat in the pit lane anyway. And they raised this with the FIA, and quite rightly that moved onwards. So it is down to other teams to protest the design if they think that design isn't in keeping with their view of the regulations. And Renault did this back sort of Canada time, before the summer break. The FA, as I say, went through the process, and eventually by the time we got to Monza, us hadn't changed the parts. Therefore, Renault were able to raise a formal protest, because a lot of this stuff does kind of just go and change it. The little word with the team, go and change it. When you come back, if it's all changed, that's the end of it. And they don't like disqualifying. They don't like all of this kind of stuff going on. And some quite blatant regulation changes have kind of been swept under the carpet by this process. But it does kind of keep the sport moving quite smoothly. So, that's fine. But obviously, Haas hadn't followed the FIA's advice. And Renault stepped in. So, as I say, it's their job to do so. And they did quite rightly so, and made that change.
So Haas are appealing it. I mean, what's obviously you may not know the ins and outs of the appeal, but is it literally a case of they're going to sit down and say, well, when you order things from Amazon and they say it'll be here by Tuesday, and then it doesn't arrive because Hermes or someone else?
I cannot see a Haas defence for this problem, because, as I say, they could have physically taken a saw to these pieces. They could have put the old floor back on. They could have taken it to someone else to make a new one or to modify or what have you. There's lots of things they could do, but they chose, without any obvious defence, to run the part that was in question. So unless they feel that somehow their part still isn't subject to that technical directive and the basic rules, which, bearing in mind, though, the technical directive was aimed specifically at the Haas design.
Yeah.
And I think, we've seen often in the past, anyone appealing something that looks like a pretty slam dunk case tends to get a fairly harsh response from the FIA, which, if you think, well, look, you guys, you haven't changed it. You've been running it since Canada. They could wipe out the points from Canada through to Monza potentially. And I don't know if that is an option, but the FIA have been fairly harsh with unnecessary appeals in the past. So it's a dangerous game Haas are playing, but obviously they feel there's something there they can justify. I wonder if that appeal will actually get through to the stage where it does actually become a formal appeal, or if it just maybe gets dropped at some stage. Maybe we'll know a bit more in Singapore. So yeah, that's kind of this whole procedural thing that's gone on, and that's just the way Formula One kind of does this kind of technical business. As I say, there's lots of precedents for that in the past.
They should have just been honest. They should have just been honest and said, look, Grosjean's been keeping this car on the track. We don't even want to change the oil if we're honest.
We thought we'd have crashed it by now and damaged it. Yes. It's a rather odd situation that it had to have come about. But the area in question and the regulations in question, as I say, are really vague. So what we're talking about the front lower edge of the floor. So what we call the T-tray or the splitter, the bit that sticks out the raised part of the chassis. Now, if you were looking at from underneath, the front edge has to be radiused by 50 millimeters. So rather than it sort of being like a tongue sticking out, it had to be, or a square tongue sticking out. It just had to a little bit knocked off the corners.
Yeah.
Now, the problem you get is the regulation says the reference plane, which is this lower level of the floor, because, the floor is in a kind of step shape if you looked at it in sort of frontal view. Now, they said the front of the reference plane has to be radius. Now, if you're talking engineering and CAD terms, a plane is a surface with infinitely nothing. That's not the word. What's the no thickness whatsoever?
Yeah.
Which is obviously not something you can't radius the edge of something that has no thickness.
No.
Obviously, the floor has a thickness, so there's a bit of wiggle room there in the regulations. And what lots of teams have done in the past is they want some sharp edges in that area in order to shape the airflow that goes underneath the step under the floor and obviously out to the diffuser. So what they've actually done is they've created that radius with not much more than it looks like a piece of wire. Obviously, it probably started out as a massive piece of titanium that was machined until there was just this little 50 millimeter curve of metal, and then going back to the rest of the thing. And you see it on lots of cars. A lot of people mistake that area for a hole in the floor. And then the other regulation says if you were looking again from underneath upwards under the car, no body work on the next step up, which is the step plane, which is the kind of the underneath of the floor itself and the underneath of the side plugs, should be visible from below. And again, this is another grey area. So if you radiused that lower edge, are you allowed to see body work above it? Regulations aren't entirely clear. So what Haas have ended up doing is says, well, we're going to take the regulations at their word. We'll radius a tiny little piece of the lower area and stick bodywork on the step area above it that would be visible from beneath. And if you look at the individual regulations, that could be kind of, that could be legal. What then happens is the FIA, with this technical directive, as I said, post Canada, post the initial protest from Renault, said, actually, do you know what? No, you can't do that. Haas didn't make the change to that area. Obviously, that's where the problem comes. So what Haas have to do is they have to move some of the bodywork at the very front edge of this floor out of the way in order that the radiused section is clearly apparent and there's no bodywork shadowing it and coming off of it. Because what happens is obviously all the barge boards and the turning vanes all start from that point because of the way the regulations and the bodywork zones are set up. Is it a big aero change? Well, it's going to be influential because it's dealing with the floor. But moving them back 50 millimeters, I don't think would be the night and day difference between Haas beating Renault to a couple of points at Monza. But that's not the point. It's not whether an advantage was gained. Does that meet the regulations and the prevailing technical directives that apply to that area? So as I say, Haas. They played the game initially in terms of getting the FA to agree, which never really kind of came about. But then once the FA did this, technical directive, then they really just have to follow it, even though Christian Horner, whenever they get raised against the Red Bull, go, well, they've got no legality value. It's like, yes, they do.
Yeah.
Go to court and argue about it, but in terms of the sport, technical directives are, supplementary to the rules, and you do need to follow them. If you don't, then you're into a whole world of sort of legal situation, which goes way beyond my understanding. But it's accepted in the sport that technical directives have to be followed as if they were regulations.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see what the outcome of that is. And I've got to be honest, if I was at Renault, was an engineer or somebody higher up at Renault, I probably would have protested as well. Not for the difference in points that there may have been between Haas and Renault, just to make Haas's life difficult more than anything, just to make things difficult with for them, going to the next few races. That's any advantage is an advantage, isn't it? And teams will do anything to get an advantage.
Exactly. It's gone on for as long as the sport has had rules, really, and as things start to get competitive, people will start to pick holes in things, and they will, hold things back for the right moment and then release, that on that car isn't right. And, we've seen it all over the years with the radius on Ferrari's barge boards and the flexibility of this and air blowing out of, everyone has got something on their opposition that they sometimes choose or not choose to delay acting upon.
Yeah. What about the talking about flexibility? The flexibility of some of the rear wings was called into question after Spa, wasn't it? You saw Mercedes and someone else.
Red Bull.
Was it Red Bull with some slightly flexible rear wings, which of course are now not allowed?
Yeah, I think there were a couple of cars that had wings wobbling side to side as they went over curbs, and I think again this is one of these things where there's flexibility and there's flexibility. And without sort of going too deeply down the engineering route, if something looks like it's just wobbling,
that's
yes,
okay.
it's flexible, but that's okay, and that's not giving them any advantage. What you find is it's not this kind of rapid wobbling that you've got to worry about. It's when things slowly move as the car accelerates and then flick back up under braking, which you tend to see on the front wings, particularly at the moment. Even though there have been regulations to try and cut that out. It used to happen a lot on the rear wings, but they've really made that all so solid now that very little scope to play about with it. So I didn't see anything going on that made me think, that's not good. That really shouldn't be like that. Wobbling wings, wobbling bodywork, if anything, it's probably a detriment to aero rather than an advantage. So, we can kind of scratch that sort of conspiracy stuff that was being bantered around during the Spa weekend.
Throw the tinfoil out from that one then.
Yeah.
Talking of things not moving under braking or moving under braking, the Sauber, the DRS, the issues that they were having, especially with Ericsson's crash in FP2. Sauber has said that they're working on a solution for that. Now, I was of the impression that DRS was kind of a standardised part.
It's slightly different.
Not at all. No, that everybody designs their own DRS. And I made the point at the time is that if you look at the regulations for DRS and comparing it, bearing in mind that is a safety critical system, if you compared that with something else that's safety critical, such as brakes or the throttles, or any other system that would make the car lose control, all it says is, apart from the function of it needs to open and close, it's like if it fails, it should fail in the down position, which doesn't really mean anything. It's like saying, well, if the brakes fail, the brakes should fail on rather than off.
Because that's clearly less dangerous.
So the regulations are very, very woolly. And we've had some issues with DRS over the years, and surprisingly less than perhaps you would imagine for a system such as that. And what happens with DRS is you have the really powerful hydraulics in the car that have a little ram that literally pulls the wing open. So it's not being pushed from upwards, it's being lifted up by this kind of hook that you see attached to it next to the pod, and it's pulled open in a couple of milliseconds. And then when the driver then reaches the braking zone, the hydraulics release the pressure, and the flap of the wing just flips down under aerodynamic pressure. But it's not closed. There's nothing pushing it back down. It's just the aerodynamic pressure. So then there's two problems that you then have. Is first of all, what is the signal from the car to tell the hydraulics to release the pressure and close the rear wing flap to get rid of DRS? And different teams have different systems, which again, when you look from the regulatory point of view, isn't a good thing. A lot of the teams say it's only when you come off the throttle completely, as you would go on to braking, that then closes. Some of the teams do it when the throttle is maybe not closed, only partially closed, as the driver's maybe lifting off just to get the car to settle a bit before going into full braking. And other teams have, a manual option where the driver can actually close it. Some of them actually only when you hit the brakes will it close. So again, regulatory, a complete grey area. So, at what point does it close? Because really it should be closing long before you hit the brake pedal, because you know how hard and fast the drivers get on the brakes.
Yeah.
And then, as I say, you've got these, how does it physically close? And what was happening for the Sauber system, as I understand it, is it was their Monza rear wing, which obviously was a new specification. And when it was open, the flap was almost going over center. It was almost actually creating a little bit of lift as the air goes underneath it, rather than it being, sort of pushed slightly downwards by a bit of downforce on top of it. And this was allowed because effectively the lock stops, you to use a motorbike term, to stop the travel of that flap going upwards too much weren't quite right. And what then happened is, as he reached the braking zone, the air pressure was keeping the flap open. So that flap was never going to close until the car reached an almost stop and the wind stopped blowing over it, because there's no positive closing system from the hydraulic point of view on that. And yeah, as we all know, once you hit the brakes, when you've got no rear downforce, that car's going to swap ends quicker than anyone can cope with.
I was going to say, Ericsson's car did stop eventually.
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
not how he wanted it to stop.
No, I mean, yeah, it did come to a stop, and I don't know what state the wing was in by the time it got there, but it went through the mill on the way to coming to a standstill, didn't it? It's one of these things. Williams had some issues with their DRS not working from a point of view as when the DRS actually closed. I think it was at Silverstone where they had a new rear wing spec that even when the rear wing closed, it was a long time before the airflow would reconnect under the wing and get the downforce working again. So again, the driver's lifting off and needing the grip back, but the aerodynamics, even if the physical part of the wing weren't working. So yeah, DRS really does, I think they really do need to have some kind of additional regulations put into this.
Technical directive.
Exactly. I think on safety grounds they can just push that straight through, and it doesn't seem too draconian, and I don't think we'd lose any great aspect of the race by just tweaking these rules just to be sure, because the potential for a massive accident at the end of a straight is worrying, and the ferocity of Ericsson's crash really was kind of belied a bit by the fact that he just got out of the car. But there was a lot of energy going through that car as it tumbled down.
It was a terrifying crash to watch.
Yeah, well, I was away from a TV. I wasn't watching it live, so I saw the pictures, and I didn't want to say anything until I'd actually seen the crash and the fact that he'd got out. And when he was out, and he's walking through the paddock, it's like, how was that possible? You thought he'd just be bruised up and just winded even, but no. I mean, his ability to get out of that car really is a testament to the safety work that the FIA have put in, over these past couple of decades.
Oh, definitely. I mean, that is one thing that you can't take away from the FIA is the absolute focus on safety that they've had. Obviously, Jackie Stewart is partially responsible for that because he's been the biggest campaigner basically as long as I've been watching Formula One.
Yeah, no, absolutely. He's always sort of pushed that. And, even back in the day, he made himself very unpopular by, talking about, safety and talking about seatbelts and crash helmets and things. And, back then it was, a very different attitude from a lot of the drivers. some of that attitude still remains in a few drivers, and and as certain aspects of the fans as well. That this is somehow gladiatorial and something that you should give your life up for, but. Kind of modern social responsibility means that we can't just go around, sort of killing drivers and marshals and spectators just for our entertainment.
Yeah, you were talking about Williams before, Scarbs, when you were saying about their the problem with the wing. Earlier on in the season, you were talking to us when we had you on last time about their sort of aerodynamic stalling issue that they had. Is there signs that they've got around that problem and just sort of have a little bit more of a stable car? The last few races, we've seen them sort of, I wouldn't say coming towards the front, but we got a double points finish in Monza thanks to Grosjean's disqualification, which is definitely a massive step forward from where they were at the beginning of the season. The beginning of the season.
Yeah, in some respects, I could either be very cruel to Williams or I could kind of hold judgment. Spa and Monza, in terms of suiting the engine and the aero package they've got, and as we've seen this over recent years, really flatters the car and the drivers, in all due respect to the engineers and to the drivers themselves. But I don't think when we get to Singapore, when we get to some of the more challenging circuits that we'll have to close out this year,
Suzuka, for example,
still be Suzuka, for example, that they will have that level of performance again, and I think we will see them, sadly trailing at the very back of the grid again, which is pretty much where they were, sort of before the summer break.
Yeah.
So. Yeah, I think they have improved the car. I don't know where they're at in terms of producing the big updates. I mean, it certainly hasn't been visually apparent that they've done anything major to it. But again, this stuff can all be very subtle. Maybe they've changed parts that we can't, detect without literally seeing the CAD compared to the old CAD and the new CAD. But sadly, I think Williams really have kind of, lost this season now. And it's quite interesting how they are now talking, if we're now looking at how Williams go forwards, because obviously there's been some changes to the way that team is funded and managed over the summer break, in terms of potentially the Strolls moving over now towards Force India, that perhaps Williams, if they seem convinced, and everyone I've spoken to, that they have the funding in place for the next few years. And, I don't know who that is. I honestly don't know who it is. And I know some of the people that are involved, I don't know quite what will happen. But, there's some potential for Williams to have the funding that they need once they've lost the Strolls and once they've lost the Martini sponsorship. And that may give them back some technical direction, that the Paddy Lowe then has a free rein to do what they need to do. Because before the summer break, Williams, as an entity, were talking about moving towards taking more hardware from Mercedes, almost a Haas-like listed approach. Now, yes, you could argue that would be one way for Williams to kind of get back to competitiveness, but anyone that has known and loved Williams, as so many of us have. I think it's one of those teams that is close to lots of people's hearts, and not just in the UK. Williams Grand Prix Engineering, being a listed parts team, doesn't seem to be, the Williams that we know. And I think equally, by doing that, it's almost like admitting that while we're like this, we're never going to be at the front. It's a bit, the McLaren saying, unless we've got a works engine, we're never going to beat the works team. So it's kind of that attitude. Do we want, what do we want? Do you want Williams to have some short-term improvement, or do you want them to kind of get back to a more competitive position that's sustainable? And I hope, and certainly the story we're now getting, that they're not going to take the Mercedes gearbox, then they're going to design their own as they do, and design all their other bits and pieces, suggests to me that Williams maybe are getting some of this direction that they'd lost under maybe some of the direction and funding they were getting over the past few years, shall we say.
Do you think when they were super competitive, when the hybrids first came in, because Mercedes were that far ahead of the field, do you think Williams' problem is that they rested too much on that, which was kind of them sort of gaining a false place in the championship, because a few other teams and other manufacturers had dropped back?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is an aspect. I mean, certainly the 2014 season was, exceptionally good. If you remember the year before, it was a really bad year. The year before, it was that good year when Maldonado got a win. It's not things that we say very often, is it?
Just
And
once,
they got two
thankfully.
things right. They got two things right in that year. First of all, they got the Mercedes engine, which, we all know was leaps and bounds ahead of Ferrari and Renault at the time, and it's taken a few years for it not to be, leaps and bounds ahead of the opposition. But they also got their aero setup, this low drag setup, because if you remember 2014 was when we had the fuel flow restriction. And I think everyone was thinking that you wouldn't be able to run low wing on the straights because you just wouldn't have the fuel flow to kind of power you along. And it actually turned out with some weird maths and fuel flow and time under the graph and all this sort of stuff that you could. And Williams got that worked out, and they really, got the benefit of that through 2014. But then they didn't really then seem to react to the changing situation as the power units of their rivals and the aero package of their rivals kind of caught them up. And, they've never really had a strong direction with their aero. They always turn up to the Grand Prix with about 3 different specs of wing that they'll just run and then pick one. Even different spec noses. Bits will turn up and never get seen again. They forever seem to be confused with the tyres and saying, we should have done better in that qualifying session. We didn't get the tyres working. We'll have to go away and analyse it. But there's this, you kind of getting this excuse all of the time. And they just seem to be a bit lost, really. And I think when you kind of get to that stage and, you start to drift, it takes a long time to steer the ship back to getting all of those different areas working. But, it's been proven time and time again by lots of teams that is possible. So, we'll have to kind of cross our fingers for teams like Williams to, get their act back together. Because I think there was, certainly at some points this year, we were thinking, Williams going to be around forever? Or are they going to kind of disappear at some stage? Claire was making some noises about that. It's like a little worrying, isn't it? But yeah, I'm confident that they will, have some kind of recovery over the next few years.
Did you see the picture, the FlowViz picture, where every single part of the car seemed to have a different colour of FlowViz paint on it? The car looked more like a pride flag than a Formula One car.
It was, and it's quite interesting that the response of lots of people to that picture, and a lot of people then said, well, they haven't got a clue what they're doing with their aero at the moment, do they? Which I think was kind of the gist of it, which was obviously people looking at something, understanding the situation Williams are in this season, and kind of putting 2 and 2 together and coming out with something that didn't quite add up properly. Teams often do that in testing. A lot of it used to be done in private testing, and they're trying not to do it too much in open testing now, but using multicolours of FlowViz. I mean, it was a fairly extreme example, but what they were running was the new front wing for 2019, or a version of the 2019 front wing. So it's not about where Williams were this year, that they haven't got a clue, so they're just going to paint the whole car and see what it comes out. It's trying to get them to prove what they've done with this new front wing is doing what they were expecting it to. And it's not the only way you can do that, to get that correlation is to go and do some fairly extreme tests like that. Because, you can't base all of your work for 2019 on some assumptions that what you think is working in the wind tunnel or in CFD is actually what reality is like. So Williams just kind of did a big thing. We've seen lots of teams do that in the past. So, yeah, I mean, it looked fantastic. I mean, I wouldn't mind them seeing it. I wouldn't mind them running that livery at a Grand Prix. I think everyone loved it.
You want that on the grid alongside the Red Bull camouflage testing livery?
Yes, I think everyone
yeah, I
wants
mean,
that.
maybe we just need to pick a race where everyone just comes up with wild card livery. I mean, I think that would be a fantastic idea,
I'm not so keen on it. I think it looked like the early 90s LaRousse, so I was not a fan of that.
Yeah. F1 teams seem to be consistently very bad at producing good liveries, which is kind of baffling when you see some of the ones that go around the internet at the moment. But I think F1 cars should look a damn sight more exciting from a colour point of view than they do currently.
Well, talking about exciting looking or exciting coloured cars. Where are McLaren at the minute with their development? Because it's so hard to tell from sort of an outside perspective.
It isn't. They're just rubbish.
They might be doing things that aren't working. We don't know.
Honestly, it is one of the most difficult things to understand and to feel that you can put out a plausible explanation for why they are where they are. You know, McLaren for the past few years, you know, they were very critical of Honda. They were inwardly quite critical and did say, you know, the car's not great in slow corners, but fast corners, you know, all this, we've probably got one of the best chassis out there, which, you know, anyone that had looked at the car's performance realised that patently wasn't the case. But, you know,
we may have mentioned that one or two dozen times a week.
Yeah, again, you know, I think there was certainly a PR war going on there, which McLaren seemed to be winning. You know, all credit to them, to be honest, because bearing in mind the issues they went through for those Honda years, their PR team really did, you know, kind of keep a cap on it far more than other teams have when they have trouble with their power unit supplies. But the McLaren chassis this year, I mean, it just hasn't worked. They've only really brought updates on a regular basis, but you know, I mean, the teams have said they've only really brought one update that really worked, which was the Spanish Grand Prix when they had the radical nose and some other bits and pieces. But really, it literally just isn't working, is it? I mean, it looks awful in every respect, and again, I think there's been some press this week that they've said, look, you know, it's just a bad car. I don't know what we're going to do. You know, they've tried to hire someone like James Key, who would be fantastic at McLaren in terms of setting out what do we actually want from a car. Do we want a car with lots of downforce, or do we want a car that's good to handle with, you know, not sensitive to changes and bits and pieces? And they just seem to be lacking that direction. Obviously, James Key, as we know, is still contracted to Toro Rosso. And won't be joining them anytime soon. They've now taken on Pat Fry, who is another one of these people, you know, the experience at, you know, Ferrari, and he was at Manor briefly, I think, wasn't he, as well?
Yes, he was.
McLaren, obviously at McLaren before, and at Benetton back in the day. You know, someone that can just kind of bring some direction and control to the design team, which, you know, McLaren have always had this matrix set up, and for many years they've run this kind of this triple header of Pete Prod and Tim Goss and Matt Morris. But, you know, unfortunately, I think you do need someone at the top guiding things, and I think there's been an aspect at McLaren where someone designing brake ducts may be getting mixed messages from different department heads as to what they should be doing. You know, are they getting we want this aero figure, or no, we want this, you know, this braking cooling level, or oh no, we carbon shop haven't got time. So that, you know, there is a lack of cohesion between the departments, which is only natural. It's only human. It's not a slight on any of the people involved there, because they're all great engineers. But I think they just need someone guiding that team, and you know, they've kind of suffered with that probably since Paddy left. I'm trying to remember what year that is. I'm very bad at remembering years, but you know, they need someone in that role, and I think, yeah, they've got a bit of direction now with Pat Fry and then James Key going to join the team. But where we stand at the moment, you know, they've lost Tim Goss and Matt Morris. Pete Prod, you know, is you know, an aero guy through and through. You know, yeah, they're not in a good situation, and you do worry how their 2019 car development has gone on. Why they're all mixed up with, you know, sort of issues internally like that.
That's what Pat Fry and James Key are being brought in to do then, give the team a little bit of direction and a little bit of this is where we want to go with this car, make this car do this.
Yes, I mean, I think, you know, I think it's literally something as simple as that. But the problem you've got is, I mean, I don't know when Pat Fry will join. We know James Key is some way off from joining. You know, they should already be a long way down the road of their 2019 concept. So, you know, is it too late to turn around the 2019 season? You have to worry for them.
So we're looking at James Key as like the end of the year sort of thing, or like next year, or further away.
I don't know. I mean, I know that there's been a war of words between them about can he join? Is he allowed to join? When can he join? We're going to give you money. No, we don't want your money.
We'll give you Lando.
I don't know. Because I remember I think it was either early this year or late last year when James Key was confirmed as staying at Toro Rosso, which kind of, I pictured him as being the person that stepped up into, Red Bull technology as the kind of the key person there. But when that didn't happen and they Red Bull chose Pierre Vache to come on board as the technical director below Adrian, but like the overall head, it was like, okay. And obviously with Toro Rosso talking about listed parts now as well. I mean, you can see why James was looking around, but when he may be allowed to join, for someone like Toro who could be battling with McLaren, I don't think Toro are going to release him until they absolutely have to, which is a shame for McLaren and for James personally. But
his garden will be in a fantastic state by the time he finally goes to working.
Well, yeah, I mean, he'll have a lovely garden, won't he? I mean, he's got lots and lots of time to work in it. These things do tend to get worked out eventually. With some kind of deal between the two teams. So I think he will be joining maybe after the 2019 season starts or something like that, when the damage he could do backwards to Toro Rosso by improving McLaren would be kind of spent a little bit. So
I was surprised. I thought it was going to end up with him moving to McLaren sooner rather than later, and Lando finding himself in a Toro Rosso next year.
The trouble with the driver market this year and all the other kind of shenanigans that go on around that is there's just so many pieces of the puzzle to slot in. Sometimes it looks absolutely obvious to all of us on the outside. If you put this person here, you put that person there, and they get this engine and they get that money and he drives this, and it just never works out like that a lot of the time, does it? What appears to be sensible so often gets thrown by the wayside. And the driver situation, I love to chat to people about it because it's not necessarily the area of my great expertise, but no one's got a clue this year, have they?
No, not at all.
I thought Julian Palmer was excellent on the BBC podcast because they were talking about the whole idea of Lance going to Force India this year and Kubica going to Williams, and what was the other move that was going to go? Oh, and Sainz was going to go to McLaren this year before next year. And Palmer turned around and said, yeah, this is great, but this involves Formula One teams agreeing with each other, and this never happens.
No. Yeah, again, it's one of those things. You put them in a locked room, you may get some solutions, but it doesn't work that way. And they'll probably change their mind when they came out of the room anyway. But
yeah.
Again, I think there's lots of us that are kind of, juggling the puzzle. It's like, what can we do after the summer break then with all that in mind? I don't think teams like changing drivers mid-season. It always seems to be something they shy away from. But, I think there is scope for some potential, late season ones. But we'd have to watch this space on that one.
I mean, the latest rumour that we came across yesterday was Ferrari are going to buy a large chunk of Sauber and give it to Kimi Räikkönen to run the team.
Wow, who come up with that idea?
Apparently Mika Salo.
Are you sure it wasn't the internet? Sounds like the sort of thing they'd say.
I found it on the internet.
That
But
sounds like one of the most spectacularly bad ideas. All due respect to everybody involved.
It was on a Finnish. It was on a Finnish TV show. And, my knowledge of Finnish is. I bought a couple of albums by Finnish glam metal bands, and that's about it.
Yeah, Finnish is not directly translatable to English either. It's not.
No.
A direct translation will not be a direct translation.
But no, this Finnish TV show was quoting Mika Salo saying that this is apparently what Ferrari are looking at doing for 2020.
I've never seen Kimi as someone that would stay in the sport as a team principal. And equally, you would have to doubt his skills in that role when you've got someone like Freddie Vasseur running Sauber so incredibly efficiently this year.
Yeah.
I don't see much mileage in that one.
No.
But yeah, weirder things have happened.
Yeah.
You'd be surprised you end up being a team principal in sport at the moment.
Would that overhaul Ferrari's other terrible decision of letting Marc Gené in a race seat?
Yeah, Ferrari have made some spectacular failures with driver choices over the years in terms of putting people in and not taking people out in time. But yeah, I think again that merry-go-round continues this year, doesn't it? You know, when we all thought it was a slam dunk, what was going to happen? We're still in the dark now.
Yeah. That was one of the funniest things I've ever seen at a Formula One race. Is I went to Belgium. Was it? Would have been 2009? Would it? No, it wouldn't. No, it wouldn't. But I was in Belgium when Marc Gené was given the race seat. I was stood at I was on the corner and I couldn't see.
What was it, Badoa? Was given the
Oh,
race
sorry,
seat?
Badoa, not Gené. I'm thinking of. I was stood in the corner and I couldn't see the straight that was coming down to it, and he just came round backwards into the gravel trap.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. Seeing as
Like
we're
I
talking
say,
about Ferrari.
Not every decision has been a great one by Ferrari, but you know, it's odd. Even with all of these, you know, lots of these teams having driver programs and test driver, reserve driver, third reserve driver, that they never pick these people when the opportunity arises. You've got to put someone in. It's like, no, we're not going to have any of them. We're going to go and pluck someone out of obscurity and throw them in the car untested.
Yeah, what is it? Nick De Vries has been in the McLaren Young Driver program since he was actually young.
Yes, exactly.
Well, we decided when Paul and I went to McLaren and we were walking down the tunnel to get there, and you've got like the big sort of the big like Holden doors, the white corridor you walk down, and we were trying to work out which door they'd lost Oliver Turvey behind.
Well, you know, it's so big there. There's probably just lots of drivers just wondering. You know, at some point I'm going to get the call up. I know it.
Here's some data. Go sit in this storage cupboard. As Chris was saying, going back to Ferrari.
Yeah, I was going to say they've had a huge leap forward in their terms of development, especially engine development this season. I think it's probably it's widely acknowledged now that they're for outright power, they're at least on par, if not ahead now of Mercedes. Is obviously it's parts to do with the car as well, but sort of going back to what Lee was saying before, Ferrari and Mercedes in danger of taking their power units so far this season, because of course they're going to be trying to push Vettel and Hamilton for the championship. But developing their cars and power units so far for this season, they end up falling back a little bit power unit wise, not so much in the cars, but power unit wise as well. Being suppliers as well as, you know, the works teams, they could find themselves in a situation where, you know, Renault, for example, will make massive gains because they were overdeveloping for 2018. By the time 2019 rolls around, Renault and Red Bull, for example, are right there with them as well.
I think with the engines, it's less of a problem because the engines are, you know, could literally be carried on from one season to the next. So literally everything you do this year is your baseline for next year. So, and although they have to manufacture, obviously, you know, enough of these power units for their own team plus their customer teams, that's almost like a different department and something they're scaled up for anyway. So that isn't such an issue on the power unit side. I think the problem we have is that Ferrari and Mercedes, and to an extent Honda, do very much do their development in season with big steps in the engine every time they get the opportunity to introduce a new upgrade. Renault have this odd development pattern where they don't tend to bring big step updates through the year. They had a big improvement of their car, their engine year on year for these past few years, and they haven't caught Ferrari and Mercedes, and it's almost as though they kind of wait for the winter to do their work. Obviously, clearly they're working through the year, but they're not introducing these bits in, and they always seem to be that little bit on the back foot and never quite sure, you know, where they're at in comparison. as odd as it seems like there is still huge amounts of performance to be gained from these power units, even being this many years now into the regulation since 2014, even though, the energy recovery power output is still capped as it has been in 2014, but the available energy to that, because of the way that you can harvest both under braking, but also with the MGUH, means that, they've got more electric available than, in some respects than they were probably initially thought they could ever do with. But now they are finding things to do with this, this spare energy. And these engines are absolutely incredible. It massively frustrates me that none of these people talk about their engines, or at least talk about it in a way that the average person could understand it. I mean, I was reading an interview with Andy Cowell, and it's these engines are so fantastic, but the way they explain them sometimes to the technical people is out of reach of your average person, that just simply don't understand that these engines are banging on 1,000 horsepower, not just in qualifying, but through the race for how many races are they running now? 3 engines? That's almost 7 races an engine.
7 officially.
7 officially. Obviously, some teams are able to run them slightly less, but that's not a problem they want to have. And they're using a third less fuel of the old V8s, and they've got huge amounts of torque. And for the top 2 manufacturers, they're incredibly reliable. It's absolutely amazing. So you do have to worry about someone like Renault getting on par with Ferrari and Mercedes, especially if we are now talking about this engine being carried beyond 2021 because there aren't these new manufacturers coming in that was promised. And I don't think anyone would complain if we, from the manufacturer side, if we did keep this spec engine, maybe start to bring some development limitations in for post 2021. But I know not everyone does love these engines, but the investment's been put into them now. They are pretty incredible. Let's learn to love them.
Do you think it's a good idea then to get if they were to keep the engines a bit longer? Because I was worried when I was reading that, especially given the fact that Mercedes and Ferrari seem to be so buddy at the minute, that all the
that is strange, isn't it?
Yeah. But all the nice sort of pro sport ideas that were going on for the 2021 season might start to get rolled back now. And I wondered whether it was because of if you've got Mercedes and Ferrari going into meetings going, well, we want things the way they are because we're winning. If this was a sort of a danger that's going to start affecting the sport, into the new Concord Agreement and stuff.
It's difficult because, as you say, you've got the new Concord Agreement, and obviously it's nice to have all the regulations aligned. Having said that, have a massive change to the chassis and the engines in a single season is a big step. So again, that's something that in these times when teams don't have, certainly the midfield don't have a fortune to play with in terms of R&D budget. So I'm happy that we're not getting rid of some of the energy recovery systems, because obviously the heat energy recovery system was under threat. They were talking about twin turbos. They were talking about increasing the fuel flow again, which I see very much as sort of retrograde steps, and I don't think they really would add anything necessary hugely to the spectacle. We've got these engines. They've put the investment in them. And as we know, if everyone keeps developing, as we got to the end of certainly the V8 era when they were allowed to develop the engines, because obviously there was this freeze went on for quite a few seasons, didn't it? That everyone really had a fairly equal engine, and they all kind of found their way. We know the Renault wasn't the most powerful V8 at the end of that era, but it was very fuel efficient and it was very drivable when they had some great means of blowing the exhausts off throttle and stuff. So it balanced with what Ferrari and what Mercedes and all the other manufacturers were doing at the time. So I think probably the best bet is, let's start to think about what the next generation engine should be, but don't rush to push it in for 2021. and have a line in the sand a bit further up the road and introduce it then. Everyone's got different opinions on what should happen with engines or power units. I've got mine where I think we should have more hybrid, if anything, and maybe freeze the petrol engine aspect of it, because that's the way the world's going. And we've already got incredibly expensive and efficient hybrid combustion engines in the Formula One cars. Let's leave that bit alone, and let's see how much we can get recovered from the energy that's in the car as a result of that. But that then starts to get into questions of noise and expense and everything else. But
well, didn't John Todd say this week that Formula One will never be an electric formula, something along those lines?
I've got to say, I didn't see that comment in context. If you take that at face value, and if we look at the way the world is going, and we're not talking about what do they call it, road relevance and all of that stuff. If we just, fuel is a finite limit, emissions, all of that stuff, social responsibility stuff. To say that Formula One will never go electric is kind of saying, well, Formula One is going to become a dinosaur, really, isn't it? It's, I don't mind him saying it's not going to become electric anytime soon, but to say it would never happen is basically saying F1 will become a little funny sideshow, or pack up completely, or just be this kind of quirky heritage series. I don't think that's what Formula One should be. But again, I think lots of other people will have things. But again, I don't really understand what he meant in terms of timescales.
Yeah.
Is he talking in the next 10 years, 20 years, 30 years? I don't think that to run a petrol-engined formula is sustainable in the long term.
Say if you go back 30 years and you told somebody, late 80s, saying that in 30 years' time, Formula One's going to be run by 1.6 liter engines and batteries that are attached to that as well.
And most of the drivers will be sober.
Yeah, exactly. they would have.
Most of the drivers won't be old enough to drink.
They would have laughed at you, because they would have turned around and said, "Well, I've got my Vauxhall Astra parked outside. It's got a 1.6 engine in it. You're telling me that they're going to have the same amount of power as them?" That aspect of it is just that is crazy that they're getting so much power out of a 1.6 liter. I know it's V6 engine, but the actual internal combustion engine part of it. But it's all the bits that go with it that just producing all these massive amounts of power. I suppose if you, like you're saying, if the technology's there, then why not build on it? But does that not make it more difficult for newer manufacturers to come into the sport? Like there were rumours of Porsche, maybe Audi, and who was the other one? Somebody else was going to come in, and Aston Martin maybe were going to come in and build some engines, but they shied away from it because the massive investment into the power units.
Well, exactly. It's a massive undertaking, and I think Cosworth were one of the companies that were involved in the discussions, and to suddenly, as Honda have proven, to join from a near standing start and get up to the level that Ferrari and Mercedes are at with these power units now is an enormous task, because they've sunk hundreds of millions of pounds, as have their fuel companies, into the development of these power units. And again, it kind of goes back to almost not a technical question, but it's almost more like sort of theological one for liberty, is what is Formula One? Who do we want? Do we want to have cutting edge tech, people spending a fortune on development, or do we want, a cut price engine that's loud? Do we want the manufacturers involved? Don't we want them involved? There's broader questions beyond the purely technical one, because as you say, at the moment, it would be very hard for anyone to come in, even if they got rid of, the heat energy recovery system. Even to develop an engine, the combustion aspect of this engine would be, an enormous undertaking for anybody. So, it is restrictive. We could reach the stage where we have providing engines with a degree of parity between all of the teams.
Do you think next year, when we've got like the new aero regs that are starting to come in, if the cars can all of a sudden follow each other and race each other a bit close, do you think lots of these questions will just fall away then?
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe because Formula One is historically very knee jerk to anything that happens, and that's not necessarily. I mean, hopefully, with the way that they've been looking at the 2021 regs, is starting to show that they are actually approaching them in a proper technical, analytical fashion, which has never happened before. So maybe, some of these questions won't be, sort of pushed so hard to get a response and a solution immediately. I think the changes for next year, theoretically, from an engineering point of view, should reduce the size of the wake in the car in front for the car behind. How much that will improve overtaking is very hard to say, because it's not a night and day difference. It's just first step in a long path of getting that working. But it's all very much steps in the right direction. And I don't think we'll see that won't really come out completely until 2021. But it's looking, certainly the regs for next year are looking better rather than the ones that we had in 2017, which we knew were going to be detrimental for overtaking and for the performance of the cars, for the car following another car. So it's a step in the right way, and maybe some better racing. We've had some pretty good racing this year, in fairness, but again, you then look at the factors that have allowed for that, which tends to be tyre degradation and safety cars and bad decisions by people, rather than it being out and out. Everyone starts off the grid and then someone honestly overtakes loads of people because they're just having a good day, like the old days when John Watson would wake up at Long Beach in the morning and go, right, off I go, and drive through the field. I don't think we're going to get to that stage just yet.
No, I agree with Nico Rosberg. Bring back a little bit more ground effect rather than loading the top surfaces with aero. Again,
you can come out with stuff like that very easily, and it needs to be looked at properly in the wind tunnel. And certainly that is a direction to there's lots of things they need to work out to stop what's creating the problems of these cars. Some of it is the way the regulations over the years have actually capped the performance of the cars. Every time the cars get quicker, the FIA will go, we'll make the wing a bit smaller. And then the teams go, I've got a smaller wing now. How am I going to get my downforce? It's like, okay, well, I'll make the wing even more aggressive, and then I'll tweak loads of bits of bodywork upstream to make that wing work. And before you know it, you've got a car that was supposed to be slower, that is as fast as it was before, but only because everything has been stretched to the maximum to make it work. And then when you just keep doing that over decades, as they've really kind of done since... probably 1983 was the first year they had that big draconian cut to the downforce. They've just made everything smaller and everything more complicated. Again, the 2017 rigs went way too far when they didn't need to. I think there are some easier answers to making these cars work better. And as I say, I think Ross Brawn and his team and the way they're approaching it is exactly the right way. I can't wait to hear what their plans are. Hopefully, they've done as good a job as they have when they were working at teams. Now they're working for Formula One Group.
Let's hope so.
Fingers crossed.
Mm.
Anyone got any other questions for Craig?
Yeah, looking at all the updates that there've been since we talked to you last, what's the most interesting that you don't think gets talked about enough?
Oh, that's an interesting one. Let's have a think. It's funny because in lots of respects, the development this year has been not that exciting in terms of someone coming up with something that's like, ooh, well, that's really new. Whereas it's just been a case of, well, we had 4 slots in this last year. We're going to make it into 5 slots. And then by the summer, we're going to have 6. And then they're just cutting the surfaces up into more and more pieces, which... doesn't tend to be that exciting. It doesn't. There's no real massive innovation. I think the thing that really has kind of caught us all of our attention, as we kind of spoke about a bit earlier on, was the engine development this year, particularly for Ferrari. And they started 2014 with such a poor engine that just completely misunderstood the regulations in so many ways. It's taken them a few years, And I think really the interest this year has been that kind of balance in performance between Ferrari and Mercedes, isn't it? That we know the Ferrari is a very consistent car, and I think it's maintained that this year. And again, we know that the Mercedes can be a bit more sensitive a car, but is maybe at the root of it was much quicker. And I think at the beginning of the year, that carried over, didn't it? Where we thought, that Mercedes, when they unlock it, poof, off they go. But Ferrari were kind of, getting the results in. And I think now as the season has kind of gone on, Ferrari have added horsepower to the car that starts to now give them these pole position potential positions, which allows them potentially to manage the race, which then is bringing into question their racecraft and their race strategy. Whereas Mercedes seem to have kind of lost that edge in qualifying now. And there's lots of reasons. We talk about oil burn and how they've chosen to develop the engine. And again, how they manage their tyres, which is getting much better now. And again, how the weather affects the two different teams, how the type of circuit affects the different teams with the tyres, and how that balances. Because, I think everyone now would probably justifiably say that the Ferrari is probably the quicker car over a lap, maybe even in most races would be the quicker car, but somehow they're not getting it working. Whereas Mercedes, which have historically been probably let down a little bit of race strategy, certainly at the early part of this year as well, are now getting their race plan together so well that it's kind of making Ferrari look stupid. And, I think the gap in the championship has opened up a little bit too much to be maybe mega excited for a complete battle all the way through to the end of the year. But certainly, I don't think if any of us can predict who will win at a particular race for any of the races at the back end of this year. Even Singapore, which obviously has always been a Mercedes weak point because of the heat and the energy that goes into the tyres around the track. But they've really been getting on top of that over the past few races. And could Mercedes have a strong race comparative to Ferrari at Singapore? I think there's a potential that they could. Could Red Bull maybe not have a great race at Singapore? Red Bull seem to have dropped off the radar a little bit over recent races. And their reliability has been absolutely dreadful, both on the Renault side and some of the Red Bull side. I mean, their clutch seems to be a particular weak point for the past couple of years that have led to Max and Dan retiring, when perhaps in another car the clutch would have lasted, a gearbox problem or a spin, but they seem to be forever stranded with clutch failures.
No, it can't be clutch. Every time Christian Horner was adamant it was Renault's fault.
No, last week he did definitely say it was the clutch. I think him and Cyril Abita will have finally sorted the differences out. He thinks they have, but he's not sure what Cyril actually said.
Again, I think lots of people blame lots of other people. It's a bit like it must be Ericsson's fault, isn't it, for these problems? But I think the balance of this year is going to be really interesting at the front of the field. Just that balance in power between Ferrari and Mercedes. Regardless of the championship outcome, I think where they get to by the end of the year is going to be fascinating. And then, as you say, how are they going to hit the ground running next year? Where are Red Bull going to be? And then, God help us, trying to pick out what's happening in the midfield, because it's all over the place, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
It's so close between so many teams that I did a big round robin at the Spanish Grand Prix with lots of technical directors and sort of say purely about the midfield, which now is basically everyone below Red Bull and at the guy that waves the flag at the back of the grid, really, because as we saw at Monza and Spa, Williams can suddenly jump up into a Q3 position. We're seeing Leclerc in the Sauber, which we would all confidently predicted would be propping up the back of the grid. He's getting into Q3. He's getting, they're getting good points results in, and depending on the road and how in that day and any other kind of thing that happens, the midfield, you can't really predict who's going to come out on top in any given race.
So my last question for you then, Craig, was going to be, if you were going to pick one for the title, who would you pick? If we're sitting here early December, who is the world champion by that point?
I think we will end up with Hamilton as champion. He's got quite a big gap at the moment, albeit one that could be eroded by a single DNF for him, but equally one that would be unassailable if Vettel had a DNF as well. I think, Ferrari may end up winning more races in the back end of the season because of the way the car is and the circuits that we've got lined up. But I don't see that there's enough from Ferrari to really obliterate, Hamilton from just following Vettel home for a number of races.
Yeah.
So and I think in fairness to Hamilton, I think he's the one that's got the driving done this year. As critical as you could be of both drivers, I think at the Drivers' Championship, he's taken race wins when he really shouldn't have, and that for me is the sign of a great season for you. And in terms of the constructors, I think it's going to be sort of fascinating to see how that kind of bubbles down in the last few races. I think that could be really close. You would argue it should go to Ferrari, who had the more consistent and the more high-performing car, but maybe they're the team that haven't really got their act together on race weekends, rather than just what goes on back at the factory.
But do you think might be a bit of a blow to Vettel if, let's say, come the end of the year, if he's had the best car pretty well, if he thinks the best car for pretty much the whole year, and if he doesn't manage to win a championship again, does he start thinking like what happened to Alonso?
I joked to some friends on a private chat during the Monza Grand Prix, is like, who's replacing Vettel next year? And where do you think he's going to go? I think you've got two aspects of that. You've got him personally in his head where he's at. He has been beaten by Hamilton. There's been days he's beaten Hamilton, but if it does come down to the end of the championship, this was a really strong chance for him to win a championship. He doesn't get it. Yes, he will bounce back, but I think it will be in the back of his mind. But then you have it, he lost that Monza Grand Prix victory in front of the new boss, who's obviously got his own views of where Ferrari are going to go. It's like, where am I investing my money at the moment? Millions for this guy that crashes at the second corner and didn't get pole position when he really should have in front of me. The Italian media, if they start to get the daggers out for Vettel, he may start the season in 2019 in a Ferrari, but we know Ferrari aren't afraid of getting rid of people mid-season if they just suddenly decide, no, that's it, you're gone, mate. So, I think there is potentially a lot at stake. I mean, Vettel's reputation, has been up and down over his career. I think there was a point when everyone was singing his praises, and then there was the change of regulations. The Red Bull wasn't as competitive, and suddenly he was being beaten by his teammate. And it's like, well, he's a one-trick pony. He came to Ferrari, and he's the hero. Now maybe he's having a dip again. It's sort of these sort of dips and rises for the drivers. But if you catch a dip at the wrong time, so often it's the case that it's game over for you.
I'll tell you what, I'm looking forward to the 2020 IndyCar Championships when Vettel and Alonso are fighting for the title.
You just know Alonso will miss out by like 1 point. He'd lead it for every single race, and the only time Vettel would lead it would be the end of the last race.
Oh, yeah, but Vettel will be driving a Ferrari-powered Team Raikkonen IndyCar.
Or it could be electric by then, who knows? Formula One's full of cycles, isn't it? And I think there's potential for a few of the big drivers maybe to choose to bow out over the next few years. So, we've got some great guys coming up through the ranks, and potentially some changes to the competitive order with the change in the regulations and stuff. So, Formula One may actually be coming into its next golden era, which is great for all of us.
I can't help think that if Ferrari, it seems to be edging more towards that this whole Leclerc thing might be a done deal. Them putting Leclerc in the car next year says to me that they don't have the faith in Kimi Raikkonen to just give him his wingman for another year.
I mean, there's lots of ways you can view it, isn't there? Maybe bringing Leclerc in for 2019 would be because we want him to be the team leader in 2020, or maybe, halfway through 2019. Yeah, we've got this new guy running the thing who's, excuse me, I can't remember the guy's name now, but, and equally, Ferrari are prone to meltdowns, aren't they? When things don't go their way, it's happened, historically, time and time again.
It might be
I think
happening right now.
Maybe with Marchionni, sadly, we've kind of lost him, and I maybe was a critic of him, but he did actually get that team structured to a position where they have been very competitive this year. If he was still around, maybe it would have been a meltdown. Maybe with this new guy. Maybe it's clearing out the cupboards again. It's very tricky, and then you obviously then look at what Red Bull are doing with their drivers. They're shaping things around Verstappen, Mercedes. They've kept Hamilton on, Bottas. He's kind of winging it for another year. Again, as you say, you've got. Where are the teams going with their driver choices? Mercedes are making lots of noise about wanting to bring junior drivers in, but chose to keep Bottas on for an extra year and aren't forcing their drivers into other teams that obviously got their own issues to resolve. So, driver market and where teams are going to go is really uncertain at the moment.
Our favourite part of the year. gives us more to
Well, the silly
speculate
season
about.
starts so early. I mean,
March this year, wasn't it?
It started about the day after Australia.
Well, normally it starts the day before Melbourne to see the queue of drivers ready for a Sauber seat, wasn't it? I seem to remember a couple of years ago. It's like, one of you put your hand up and go in. We really don't mind, but it's. I'm glad I can be a curious spectator on the outside of the driver thing rather than being someone that's in there to put hard and fast predictions. I'd much rather be looking at the nuts and bolts of the cars.
That is great, Craig. Thank you so much for coming on again tonight, and hopefully we'll chat again towards the end of the season.
No, absolutely. Looking forward to it. Thanks, guys.
That's great.
Cheers, mate.
Thanks
Thank
very
you.
much.
Cheers, Craig.
Bye-bye. That was a great chat with Craig.
Now it's time to say goodbye.
But now it is time
I
to say
really
goodbye.
enjoyed that.
Thanks for listening, and once again, massive thanks to Craig Scarborough for coming on. It's always great when he's on the show.
Isn't it just?
Yeah.
Yeah. By God, does that guy know his stuff?
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's why we have him on, because we need somebody on the show who knows the stuff.
This is true.
But definitely more than us. We'll see you next week.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.